In the quiet town of Carson Hollow, Nevada, twin brothers Caleb and Connor Parker vanished without a trace during their 12th birthday party in the summer of 1984. Despite desperate searches, their disappearance became one of the town's greatest mysteries. Nearly 3 decades passed in silence, until a mysterious photograph arrived, revealing an astonishing detail that reopened the case. What really happened that day, and what surreal discovery changed everything 28 years later? It was June 22, 1984, and the bright morning sun rose over Carson Hollow, a sleepy town nestled between golden hills and dense pine forests in rural Nevada. Summer mornings here always carried a sense of endless possibility, especially for kids like the Parker twins, Caleb and Connor, who were celebrating their 12th birthday today. The town square buzzed gently as shopkeepers opened their doors. Radios softly play Madonna's Like a Virgin and Michael Jackson's Thriller. Teenagers in neon leggings and leg warmers cruised down Main Street on skateboards, while mothers with teased hairstyles shopped leisurely, laughing over cans of Tab soda. Fathers in aviator sunglasses admired their freshly waxed station wagons parked outside diners, serving pancakes and scrambled eggs drenched in maple syrup. Just outside town, the Parker family home, a cozy, white-painted farmhouse surrounded by lush greenery, bustled with joyful chaos. Balloons in vibrant shades of yellow, blue, and red swayed gently from the porch railing, while streamers danced in the warm breeze. Jane Parker, the twins' mother, wearing a flowery sundress, smiled warmly at every guest, hugging neighbors who arrived with casseroles, cakes, and brightly wrapped gifts. Her husband, Ben Parker, sporting a thick mustache and jeans paired with faded Bon Jovi t-shirt, manned the barbecue grill expertly, flipping burgers and hot dogs while trading playful jabs with his best friend, Hank Lewis. Hank, a jovial, heavy-set mechanic famous locally for his endless stash of candy in his pockets, chuckled heartily, occasionally sneaking sweets to giggling children running past. Caleb and Connor, identical twins with sandy blonde hair, freckles dusted across their cheeks and mischievous blue eyes, darted around the yard energetically. They wore matching Star Wars shirts and shorts, shouting excitedly at friends gathered to celebrate. Caleb was a quieter twin, thoughtful yet adventurous, fascinated by stories of exploration. Connor was bold, outspoken, and fiercely protective of his brother. Music crackled from an old boombox. Cyndi Lauper's girls just wanted fun competed with bursts of laughter. Kids chased each other with squirt guns, squealing as icy water sprayed their skin, while adults lounged on plastic lawn chairs sipping chilled Pepsi and munching potato chips. A lone figure stood apart, leaning against the shade of an oak tree. Carl Parker, Ben's older brother. Carl was a tall, gaunt man whose distant gaze unsettled neighbors. An ex-military officer freshly returned from a long, troubled service overseas. Carl wore faded camouflage pants and a black shirt tucked in meticulously. Strangest of all was a sleek digital watch around his wrist, its screen glowing faintly with futuristic green digits, oddly advanced for anything people knew back in 1984. Jane approached Carl hesitantly, her friendly smile masking quiet unease. "Carl, are you okay? Everyone would love you to join the fun," she said softly. Carl stared past her, lost in thought, then answered cryptically, "The boys deserve something special today. I've hidden a surprise for them in the woods by the old iron bridge. A gift they'll never forget." Jane shivered slightly despite the heat, forcing a smile. "All right, just promise me they'll stay safe." Carl merely nodded, eyes distant, gaze unreadable. Soon after, Carl approached the twins quietly. "Hey, you two explorers, want your real birthday gift." Caleb and Connor exchanged excited glances, nodding eagerly. "Where is it, Uncle Carl?" Connor blurted impatiently. Carl crouched down, whispering conspiratorially, "I've hidden it just beyond the old iron bridge. First one there gets to keep it." Without another word, the twins dashed toward the edge of the yard, laughter echoing through the warm afternoon air. Carl stood slowly, watching intently as the boys disappeared among the trees, his face emotionless beneath the bright sunlight. Hours ticked by. Afternoon turned to twilight, the sky painting itself in shades of orange and violet. Jane glanced around, worry tightening her chest. Has anyone seen Caleb and Connor? Friends began calling out the boys' names, their voices becoming increasingly anxious as only silence answered. Ben's expression grew tense, his earlier laughter forgotten. He jogged toward the woods, neighbors quickly joining his search. Soon, flashlights flickered as shadows lengthened into evening. Jane's heartbeat quickened. Something felt terribly wrong. Her breath came shorter, anxiety gripping her fiercely. Carl stood quietly near the porch, unmoving, his strange watch casting an eerie glow. "Carl." Jane snapped, voice trembling with growing panic. "Where exactly did you hide their present?" Carl hesitated briefly, before pointing vaguely toward the forest. "Near the iron bridge. They're probably just playing around. Boys do that." Jane ignored him, racing after Ben. Darkness enveloped the forest, the air thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. Voices echoed between trees as neighbors desperately searched, growing frantic as darkness deepened. "Caleb! Connor!" Ben shouted repeatedly, voice cracking. Jane's stomach churned with dread. The boys had never vanished like this before. Minutes turned into hours. Eventually, the harsh glare of police lights sliced through the night. Sheriff Tom Richards, grizzled and respected, organized teams swiftly, deploying search dogs that barked sharply, sniffing eagerly at clothing the boys had worn earlier that day. Neighbors murmured nervously. Fear spread quickly to the gathered crowd, eyes darting uncertainly as whispers turned speculative. Some glanced suspiciously at Carl, standing silently apart, his shadow stretching long beneath flickering flashlights. Deputy Sheriff Ruby Santoro, young but perceptive, questioned Carl privately. "Anything else you remember, Mr. Parker?" Carl's eyes darted briefly, betraying discomfort. "No," he whispered. "I thought they'd return quickly." Ruby narrowed her eyes, unconvinced but letting him be for now. Night deepened, becoming colder and more oppressive with every passing hour. Search teams combed the woods tirelessly, flashlights piercing darkness, calling repeatedly until voices grew hoarse and strained. Back near the bridge, Jane moved numbly, unable to rest. Her flashlight beam trembled slightly as she walked slowly along the creek bank, heart-heavy, mind swirling with horrible possibilities. Then, her eyes caught something pale, tangled among rocks at the creek's edge. Breath quickening, Jane rushed forward, falling to her knees beside the water, hands trembling violently as she lifted the soaked fabric. It was Caleb's Star Wars t-shirt, torn and muddy. Jane clutched it tightly to her chest, tears streaming silently down her face. Despair washed over her in heavy waves. Kneeling there, she whispered into the darkness, voice broken, "Please, bring them home." She stared helplessly at the ominous silhouette of the old iron bridge looming ahead, dark, silent, keeping its secrets hidden in the shadows. In that moment, Jane knew instinctively that nothing would ever be the same again. The night Jane Parker found Caleb's torn t-shirt by the creek became etched into Carson Hollow's memory like a permanent scar. The entire town mobilized immediately, police lights casting restless shadows over the sleepy community that now buzzed with anxiety and dread. Sheriff Tom Richards, a veteran of the Vietnam War, took personal charge, sensing instinctively this was no ordinary disappearance. Flashlights illuminated the forest, flickering through thick pines and rocky terrain. Men shouted commands, their breath visible in the cool night air as they combed every inch of the woods. Police dogs barked sharply, noses to the ground, pulling desperately on their leads, only to abruptly lose the trail near the cold metal of the iron bridge. Each failed attempt to regain the scent tightened the grip of helplessness among the searchers. Dawn broke pale and somber, casting long, weary faces in stark relief. Ben Parker stood by the bridge, shoulders slumped, eyes hollow, gripping a thermos of coffee he hadn't touched. Nearby, Jane, wrapped in an oversized jacket, clutched Caleb's t-shirt, unable to let it go. every crease in her exhausted face deepened with anguish. The initial questioning took place early that morning at the town's tiny police station, a single-story brick building worn by age. Deputy Ruby Santoro quietly observed as Sheriff Richards spoke gently yet firmly with Ben and Jane. "Did Caleb or Connor say anything unusual recently?" Richards asked softly. Ben shook his head numbly, while Jane struggled to speak, her voice thin with fatigue. "Nothing unusual," she whispered, eyes welling again. They were happy boys. The sheriff scribbled notes quietly, a heavy silence blanketing the cramped office. When it was Carl Parker's turn, Ruby watched him closely. Carl sat rigidly, eyes distant, his strange digital watch casting a faint glow against his wrist. Richards leaned forward, studying Carl intently. "You were the last to speak with them. Anything else you remember?" Carl hesitated, avoiding the sheriff's eyes. "No, they ran off. I didn't follow them." Ruby interjected softly. "But you knew exactly where they go, didn't you?" Carl stiffened, shifting uncomfortably. "I assumed they'd find the present quickly. And yet," Ruby pressed gently, "you didn't go check on them?" Carl's eyes flashed briefly, a mix of irritation and unease. "I didn't think I had to." The questioning dragged on, but Carl's responses remained evasive, growing increasingly terse. Ruby's instincts flared with suspicion, but without concrete proof. She had nothing more to pursue. As days passed without answers, Carson Hollow's once friendly atmosphere darkened. Neighbors whispered nervously in grocery aisles, sharing hush theories that ranged from improbable to chillingly sinister. Theories about Carl circulated heavily, suspicion fueled by his peculiar behavior and aloofness. Others speculated about strangers, drifters, or even bizarre conspiracies involving secret government experiments. Anxiety gripped the small town tightly, trust eroding quietly beneath the surface. Weeks stretched into months. The Parker home, once filled with laughter and music, grew silent and cold. Jane retreated within herself, withdrawing from friends, leaving phone calls unanswered, and eventually stopped leaving the house altogether. Ben buried himself in work at his auto repair shop, laboring silently beneath cars until exhaustion forced him home. But even then, the silence in the house pushed him deeper into despair. Late one night, months after the disappearance, Carl Parker packed a worn duffel bag and vanished without a trace. Sheriff Richards searched Carl's modest home meticulously afterward, but found nothing useful. Only a strange emptiness that matched the man himself. Carl's sudden disappearance fanned new flames of suspicion, but with nothing concrete to connect him directly, the whispers eventually faded into unresolved murmurs. Months turned into years. Slowly, media interest waned. Camera crews no longer crowded Main Street, and newspapers shifted their focus to fresher tragedies. The Parker case became a cold, unanswered mystery, its files quietly shelved in a dusty police cabinet, a grim footnote in Carson Hollow's history. Life moved forward in brief. Quiet flashes. Friends of the twins grew up, graduated, and moved away. Sheriff Richards retired, handing his badge solemnly to a younger replacement. Ruby Santoro, ever restless, transferred to a city department, leaving the Parker case unresolved, a frustrating loose end in her career. Ben and Jane's marriage quietly collapsed under the unbearable weight of silence and grief. Ben left Carson Hollow one rainy morning, his station wagon packed with memories he couldn't face. Jane, alone in the empty house, watched through faded curtains as he drove away, feeling her heart finally shatter completely. Decades slipped past unnoticed. Jane aged slowly in solitude, her hair turning silver, the quiet grief etched deeper into each wrinkle on her face. Every year on the twins' birthday, she baked a cake that sat untouched on the kitchen table, surrounded by unopened gifts carefully wrapped, addressed to Caleb and Connor, waiting silently for their impossible return. Then came a warm afternoon, precisely 28 years to the day since the twins vanished. Jane sat alone in her faded living room, a small TV murmuring softly in the corner. The doorbell, unused and forgotten, rang suddenly, startling her. Slowly rising, Jane shuffled toward the front door, pulling her worn cardigan tightly around her thin frame. Opening it cautiously, she found no one there, just a plain brown envelope lying silently on the doormat. Frowning slightly, Jane picked it up, heart quickening as she noted the lack of a return address. She closed the door quickly behind her, hands trembling slightly as she moved into the kitchen, placing the envelope carefully on the table next to the untouched birthday cake. Taking a deep breath, Jane tore open the envelope carefully, pulling out a photograph. Her breath caught painfully in her throat. It was Caleb and Connor, exactly as she remembered them, smiling broadly, frozen forever at 12 years old, standing proudly in the yard during their last birthday party. Tears blurred her vision instantly, fingers tracing their faces gently, feeling the aching memory surge fresh and raw. But as she examined the photo closer, Jane noticed something else, a subtle detail she'd never seen before. Her eyes narrowed, heart began to pound furiously. In the reflective glass of the living room window behind the boys stood the unmistakable outline of a man, tall, rigid, wearing a dark shirt and camouflage pants. And on his wrist, clearly visible even in the blurred reflection, was a strange digital watch, glowing faintly in eerie green digits. Jane gasped sharply, dread surging hotly through her veins. She recognized that watch immediately. It was Carl's. The room seemed to close in around her as Jane stared at the photo in shock, realization crashing over her like a wave. Her trembling hand shook violently as she whispered, voice cracking with both fear and anger, "Carl, what did you do?" In the heavy silence that followed, Jane understood one thing with piercing clarity. This nightmare was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun. Jane Parker stood frozen in her kitchen, clutching the photograph tightly, eyes fixed on the haunting reflection. Her heartbeat quickened, and a wave of nausea washed over her. The past she'd fought so hard to bury had come crashing back, clear and undeniable. It was Carl, no doubt about it. His military posture, the strange modern watch glowing faintly in the reflection, triggered vivid memories she desperately tried to suppress. Fear mixed with rage burned in her chest. Her trembling fingers brushed the faces of Caleb and Connor, preserved forever at age 12, unaware of the sinister presence just behind them. She knew she couldn't handle this alone, not again. Early the next morning, Jane made a call she'd been avoiding for years. Ruby Santoro arrived in Carson Hollow that afternoon, stepping from her worn blue Mustang, aviator sunglasses reflecting the golden Nevada sun. She surveyed the quiet town she'd left behind nearly 2 decades ago. Not much had changed. The familiar buildings, aging faces, and quiet streets welcomed her back silently. Ruby was known for her fierce determination, sarcastic wit, and tireless pursuit of justice. A veteran detective, she projected confidence, but beneath her tough exterior lay hidden scars. Her younger brother, Danny, had disappeared from Carson Hollow years earlier, a case unsolved, haunting her career and personal life alike. Ruby coped by burying herself in work, always accompanied by classic jazz tunes that played quietly through her portable cassette player, soothing her restless mind. She parked near the Parker residence, memories resurfacing like ghosts she'd never fully escaped. The Parker twins' disappearance had shadowed Danny's, a painful irony she couldn't ignore. Ruby knocked gently, hearing soft footsteps approach from inside. Jane opened the door, eyes red from sleeplessness. They exchanged a silent nod, understanding mutual grief without words. Inside, Ruby studied the photograph closely. Her experienced eyes instantly locked onto Carl's reflection and, specifically, the watch around his wrist. "That watch," Ruby murmured, brows furrowing slightly. "I remember it. Too advanced for 1984. Jane nodded shakily. Carl wore it constantly, said it was military issued, but no one ever believed him. Ruby exhaled deeply, the detective's instincts alert once again. "I'll find answers, Jane. I promise." Ruby began her investigation by revisiting elderly residents, hoping faded memories might provide fresh clues. She found herself sitting on a floral-patterned couch in Mrs. Edna Simmons' cluttered living room, sipping overly sweet tea. Mrs. Simmons, a spry woman of 84 with curly silver hair, eagerly recounted stories. "Oh, yes, that Carl Parker," she chirped enthusiastically, always marching around like he owned the place, claiming the Russians were watching us from behind the bushes. She chuckled lightly, eyes twinkling mischievously. "Used to hide behind my mailbox, scaring the mailman half to death." Ruby suppressed a smile, making notes patiently. "Did Carl have close friends? Anyone suspicious?" Edna frowned thoughtfully. "He used to argue constantly with Harry Finch, the town photographer. Strange fella, lived alone, always lurking behind that big old camera." Ruby made a mental note, feeling the name ignite her curiosity. Next, Ruby visited Louie's barbershop, a tiny, dimly lit place frozen in time. Louie, still sporting his thick glasses and carefully groomed mustache, perked up instantly upon her arrival. "Ruby Santoro, haven't seen you since you wore pigtails and tried to arrest my nephew for stealing your bike." Ruby chuckled warmly. "Good to see you, Louie. I'm here about the Parker twins." Louie nodded somberly, brushing his scissors through a customer's thinning hair. "Terrible thing. Carl Parker was always odd. Once asked me to shave military codes into his haircut. True story." Ruby shook her head in amusement, scribbling rapidly into her notepad. Louie leaned closer, whispering dramatically, "But if you ask me, Carl was into something dark. Real hush-hush." Later, Ruby stood near the old iron bridge, eyes studying the structure meticulously. Official records she dug up showed extensive repairs undertaken just days after the twins vanished, a fact conveniently overlooked during the original investigation. Ruby climbed carefully down the embankment toward the water, the soil damp and unstable beneath her boots. Beneath the bridge, rusted beams loomed silently, coated in decades of grime. Her flashlight illuminated faint tool marks and freshly welded joints, evidence someone had gone to great lengths to conceal something below. She snapped photos methodically, her pulse quickening. Suddenly, her radio crackled. Sheriff Tom Richards had news. "Ruby, come quick. We found something at the old Finch property." Arriving at the scorched remains of photographer Harry Finch's house, Ruby felt an eerie chill. She remembered the suspicious fire from childhood, officially accidental. Yet rumors lingered persistently. Inside, charred beams crumbled at her touch. Stepping carefully, Ruby noticed melted remains of photographic equipment and scattered negatives. Near the fireplace, something caught her attention. A partially burned box containing undamaged VHS tapes labeled simply, "Parker Twins, June '84. Back at the station, Ruby watched closely, the grainy footage flickering eerily across the screen. She saw the twins laughing, Jane smiling warmly. Then suddenly, something strange, an unknown man wearing dark gloves appeared briefly, tugging Caleb quickly from view. Ruby rewound repeatedly, the stranger's face frustratingly hidden. A chill ran through her spine. Someone else had been there. Ruby spent hours analyzing footage frame by frame until exhaustion blurred her vision. Her cassette player hummed softly in the background, jazz melodies soothing her anxious mind. Still, questions nagged persistently. Why had Finch filmed the incident yet never reported it? The next afternoon, Ruby revisited Jane, explaining gently what she discovered. Jane trembled visibly, overwhelmed. "Why now?" she whispered. Ruby replied gently, "Secrets can't stay buried forever. Someone wanted this truth hidden, but we're close, Jane. I can feel it." Returning again to the iron bridge later, Ruby resumed her examination beneath its looming structure. Scrutinizing every beam carefully, her flashlight finally revealed faint scratches in the metal, an opening cleverly disguised beneath a false panel. Her heart pounded. Carefully prying the rusted panel loose, Ruby uncovered a narrow passage, carefully concealed for decades. Taking a deep breath, She peered downward into utter darkness, musty air rising coldly to greet her. The hidden chamber beneath Carson Hollow had kept its secrets long enough, and Ruby Santoro was determined to finally unearth the truth. Ruby Santoro stood motionless, her flashlight beam illuminating the hidden passage beneath the iron bridge. Cool, stale air rose slowly, carrying the scent of damp earth and rusted metal. She hesitated momentarily, the darkness below stretching endlessly, whispering secrets she wasn't sure she wanted to uncover. Taking a deep breath, Ruby carefully climbed downward, gripping tightly onto makeshift metal rungs bolted into concrete walls. The deeper she went, the heavier the silence became, each breath louder, each heartbeat more pronounced. Her feet finally touched the dirt floor, echoing softly through a small, concealed chamber. Sweeping her flashlight around cautiously, Ruby took in her surroundings with growing dread. Old toys lay scattered haphazardly. Plastic army figures faded by time, a baseball glove rotted at the seams, and colorful fragments of Star Wars action figures half buried in dust. A chill ran down her spine when she recognized torn remnants of matching clothing identical to what Caleb and Connor had worn on their birthday. Ruby's pulse quickened, anxiety squeezing her throat. Moving slowly across the confined space, her flashlight revealed haunting marks gouged into the rough stone walls. Deep, frantic scratches made by small fingers desperate for escape. Ruby reached out, tracing the jagged grooves, imagining the twins' terror trapped here. Emotion tightened her chest, forcing her to momentarily turn away. Suddenly, a soft shuffling noise echoed from deeper within the darkness. Ruby froze instantly, holding her breath, listening intently. Silence followed, oppressive, heavy. Was it merely her imagination? She scanned nervously again, heart pounding painfully in her chest. Reassured momentarily, she resumed exploring, uncovering more unsettling evidence. A child's notebook filled with crude drawings of soldiers and strange coded symbols. Ruby carefully placed it into her bag, knowing instinctively that Carl Parker's obsession lingered ominously. After documenting the disturbing scene meticulously, Ruby climbed back to daylight, inhaling deeply, shaking off the oppressive darkness. Reaching her parked Mustang, she felt immediate unease. The rear tire slashed neatly. Her stomach twisted anxiously as she hurriedly unlocked the trunk to retrieve a spare. Inside, clearly placed there recently, lay a porcelain doll dressed exactly like a child from the Parker twins' birthday footage. Ruby's pulse raced, a chill crawling down her spine. A handwritten note tied around the doll's wrist read simply, "Stop digging or join them." Ruby's hands trembled slightly. Paranoia surged through her, eyes darting around quickly, half expecting to see someone lurking nearby. But the empty street remained eerily quiet. Shaken but determined, Ruby quickly changed the tire, vowing silently that threats would not deter her. Determined to understand Carl's motives, Ruby delved deeper into his connection with Harry Finch, the eccentric photographer whose suspicious death now seemed more than coincidence. Records showed Finch had briefly served alongside Carl during Vietnam, forging a bond amidst combat. Ruby unearthed letters Finch had written after returning home, detailing Carl's worsening mental state. Haunted by paranoia, convinced the government spied on citizens, and obsessively fearing imminent warfare. Flashbacks from townspeople painted Carl vividly. His paranoid rants at the diner, obsessive patrols at night, and wild-eyed warnings shouted from street corners. Ruby pieced together a portrait of a broken man, tormented by memories of Vietnam's horrors, unable to escape his delusions. Intrigued further, Ruby located Finch's surviving sister, Nora, now elderly, living quietly in a retirement home outside town. Nora, frail yet clear-minded, welcomed Ruby warmly, offering tea while recalling Finch and Carl's friendship. They were inseparable at first, Nora explained gently. But Carl changed drastically after Vietnam. Harry tried helping, photographing Carl's therapy, but eventually Carl distrusted even him. Harry confided in me. Carl claimed military tests had implanted chips, surveillance devices, and soldiers. Of course, Harry dismissed it as madness, but Carl never forgave him. Ruby's eyes narrowed thoughtfully, absorbing each detail. And Harry's photographs, did they survive the fire? Nora smiled knowingly. Harry always had a secret hiding place in his basement, beneath loose floorboards. The police missed it entirely. Ruby drove immediately to the burnt remains of Finch's house. Entering cautiously, she navigated charred timbers carefully, flashlight probing dark corners. Finding the loose floorboards Nora described, she pried them open carefully, revealing a fireproof metal box hidden safely below. Inside were stacks of photographs, disturbing images of Carl pacing wildly, his eyes haunted, uniform disheveled. Among the photos, Ruby's attention snapped to several clearly showing Carl's wristwatch, the digital numbers glowing unmistakably, dated years before such technology was publicly known. A chill tingled sharply through Ruby. Carl hadn't been lying. The watch was military issued, experimental technology tested secretly during the Cold War era. Another photograph showed Carl and Harry standing stiffly by a wooded clearing, a strange map clearly held between them. Ruby studied it carefully, recognizing local landmarks. The Iron Bridge, the Parker home, and a remote wooded area labeled South Pines. Near the center, clearly marked, was an old, abandoned well. Ruby's pulse quickened, intuition alerting her that answers awaited there. She returned briefly to Jane's house, sharing cautiously her discoveries. Jane listened silently, eyes wide with grief and hope mixed painfully. "Do you think one of them survived?" Ruby's heart twisted painfully, knowing she couldn't yet offer certainty. "I'll find out, Jane. We're getting close." Later, alone in her motel room, Ruby reviewed everything meticulously. Photographs, Carl's letters, Finch's diary. Each piece seemed connected, yet vital threads remained elusive. Her cassette player hummed softly, jazz melodies flowing soothingly through the cramped space. Ruby closed her eyes briefly, remembering Danny, her missing brother, his smiling face forever 12 in her mind. "I won't fail this time," she whispered, feeling the weight of unresolved loss press heavily upon her heart. Early the next morning, Ruby prepared to investigate South Pines, packing carefully, flashlight, camera, notebook. Arriving as dawn broke gently, she navigated the forest, Finch's map guiding her precisely. Mist rose softly from damp earth. Birds chirped sleepily above. Finding the exact clearing depicted in the photograph, Ruby halted abruptly, heart racing. Before her stood the crumbling stones of forgotten, overgrown well, its dark opening yawning silently, promising hidden truths below. Ruby approached cautiously, kneeling carefully beside it. Her fingers brushed gently against worn stone, feeling grooves clearly carved intentionally. Another coded message, perhaps. Taking a deep breath, she leaned forward slightly, peering downward into endless darkness. A sudden rustling noise echoed sharply nearby, causing Ruby to spin quickly, alert and tense. Silence followed immediately. Only birds resumed quiet songs. Ruby exhaled slowly, steadying her nerves. Carefully inspecting around the well, she noticed loose earth disturbed recently. Someone had been here. Clearing away debris carefully, Ruby discovered a buried metal box, clearly placed decades earlier. Lifting it carefully, she pried open rusted hinges, revealing carefully folded documents inside. Another map, detailed coordinates, handwritten notes clearly penned by Carl. Reading quickly, Ruby understood instantly. Beneath the well lay another hidden chamber, carefully constructed, holding unknown secrets Carl had fiercely guarded. Ruby's pulse quickened dramatically. Rising slowly, she looked again into the dark opening, understanding clearly that the well had far more than mere water, its true purpose now unmistakably sinister. Taking another calming breath, Ruby steeled herself. The answers to Carson Hollow's darkest mystery waited patiently beneath South Pines, and she intended to uncover them. The old well in South Pines loomed ominously before Ruby Santoro. Surrounded by dense forest, its cracked stones were cloaked in layers of moss, untouched for decades. Ruby's pulse quickened as she consulted Carl's faded, hand-drawn map one final time. She knew the answers to the Parker twins' disappearance lay deep below, hidden beneath years of silence. Ruby carefully secured a sturdy rope to a nearby tree, testing its strength repeatedly. She peered into the well's shadowy depths, flashlight illuminating a narrow passage descending into darkness. A chill crawled down her spine. Taking a deep breath, Ruby gripped the rope firmly and began her descent, feet pressing cautiously against damp stones. Each step echoed softly, the cool air growing colder as she lowered herself deeper into the gloom. Her flashlight beam flickered, casting ghostly shadows on the rough stone walls. The sound of dripping water amplified her anxiety, each drip sounding louder than the last. After what seemed an eternity, her feet finally touched solid ground. She stood quietly for a moment, breathing rapidly, heart racing. The flashlight revealed a small, hidden chamber beneath the well, walls covered in faded drawings, childlike scribbles, and unsettling coded messages. Ruby's throat tightened painfully. Moving slowly forward, she noticed a small, rusted metal box half buried in the dirt. With trembling fingers, she carefully lifted it, wiping away years of grime. Opening it gently, Ruby found an old, weathered diary alongside several cassette tapes. Her heart pounded, realizing immediately the gravity of her discovery. She opened the diary carefully, faded handwriting barely visible in dim light. The name Caleb Parker was scrawled shakily across the first page. Ruby's hands trembled slightly, a surge of emotion catching her breath. She flipped pages slowly, eyes widening as Caleb's fragile voice emerged through written words. "Uncle Carl says the war is coming soon. He keeps us down here to protect us from the enemy. Connor cries a lot, but Uncle Carl gets angry when he cries. I try to keep him quiet, but I'm scared too. We just want to go home." Ruby's eyes filled with tears as she read further, Caleb's desperate entries painting a harrowing picture. Carl's paranoia, deeply rooted in traumatic Vietnam experiences, had imprisoned the twins, claiming to protect them from imagined threats. Next, Ruby examined the cassette tapes carefully. Using a portable cassette player from her bag, she inserted the first tape, pressing play hesitantly. Static crackled softly. Then Caleb's frightened, childish voice emerged clearly. "Please, Uncle Carl will be good. I promise. Just let us go home. Mom and Dad must be worried." Carl's voice followed harshly, cold and distant. "Home isn't safe, Caleb. The war is already here. You must trust me." Connor's quiet sobs pierced Ruby's heart. Another tape revealed Connor's desperate pleas, growing weaker over time. Eventually, Caleb's voice, heavy with grief, whispered brokenly, "Connor tried to escape last night. Uncle Carl got angry. Connor isn't moving now. I think he's gone." Ruby paused the tape abruptly, covering her mouth to suppress a sob, heartbreaking for Jane Parker, unaware of her son's tragic fate for nearly 3 decades. Continuing to the diary, Ruby discovered a later entry revealing Carl's chilling decision. Caleb, traumatized and compliant, was given a new identity, Ian, and placed secretly into an orphanage named Clear Horizons, located far away in Utah. Ruby's pulse quickened, realizing Caleb might still be alive, unknowingly living under false memories. Carefully packing the evidence, Ruby climbed out of the well, driven by urgency. Each step upward felt heavier, burdened by truths she now carried. Reaching the surface, Ruby took several deep breaths, allowing fresh air to steady her nerves. She immediately called Jane Parker, gently revealing the heartbreaking news about Connor, while cautiously offering hope regarding Caleb. Jane's voice broke, a mixture of grief and desperate hope trembling through the phone. "Find my son, Ruby. Please." Ruby's next hours became a blur, rushing back to Carson Hollow, reporting findings to local authorities, who began reopening the investigation immediately. Sheriff Richards listened grimly, shaken yet determined to finally bring justice. With urgency guiding her, Ruby drove toward Utah, barely pausing for rest. The miles passed endlessly, landscapes shifting gradually from Nevada's arid deserts to Utah's rocky hillsides. Throughout the long drive, Ruby's mind replayed Caleb's terrified words, his voice echoing hauntingly through her memory. Finally arriving in a small town hosting Clear Horizons Orphanage, Ruby found the abandoned facility overgrown and forgotten, its weathered sign barely legible through peeling paint. The building stood quietly, windows boarded up, shadows stretching across crumbling walls. Ruby entered cautiously, stepping through splintered doors into musty corridors. Her footsteps echoed softly, disturbing decades of silence. Peeling wallpaper revealed faded children's drawings, remnants of lives once sheltered here. Moving carefully room by room, Ruby's flashlight illuminated dusty bunk beds, forgotten toys, and empty classrooms filled with overturned desks and faded blackboards. She wondered quietly how Caleb, Ian, must have felt growing up here alone, haunted by forgotten memories. In a small office, Ruby discovered dusty filing cabinets, drawers rusted shut. Forcing one open carefully, she found old records, heart pounding as her fingers brushed Caleb's, now Ian's, file. It confirmed he'd lived here quietly, eventually adopted briefly by foster parents before returning as a caretaker. Living mostly isolated, deeply withdrawn. Reading quickly, Ruby learned Ian never truly left, remaining at the orphanage even after its closure. Living reclusively, never knowing his true identity or past. Ruby's heart ached painfully, sensing Caleb remained trapped, lost emotionally as much as physically. Suddenly, distant movement caught her attention, a faint rustle echoing from deeper within the orphanage. Ruby's pulse quickened dramatically. Moving swiftly yet cautiously toward the sound, she emerged into a spacious former classroom bathed in golden sunset. At the room's center sat a man quietly sketching, facing away. Ruby approached cautiously, breath catching as she recognized the drawing scattered around him. Familiar symbols, soldiers, and childish images identical to those from Caleb's diary beneath the well. Heart racing painfully, Ruby cleared her throat gently. "Caleb?" The man froze momentarily, pencil dropping softly to floor. Silence hung heavily between them. Slowly, he turned slightly, eyes wide with confusion yet oddly familiar, like Jane Parker's lost gaze. Who are you?" he whispered softly, voice strained by years of quiet solitude. Ruby stepped forward gently, emotions thickening her voice. "My name's Ruby Santoro. I came here for you, Caleb." He flinched visibly at the name, confusion deepening. My name is Ian." Ruby knelt slowly beside him, holding Caleb's childhood diary carefully, gently opening it to familiar drawings. "No," she replied tenderly, eyes warm with compassion. "Your name was Caleb Parker. You had a brother named Connor and a mother named Jane, who's waited desperately to find you." Caleb, Ian, stared blankly, eyes filling gradually with tears, confusion mingling with buried fragments of recognition. I don't understand." Ruby placed the diary softly into his trembling hands, voice breaking slightly. "It's time to know who you really are." A single tear traced down his cheek slowly as his fingers brushed the worn pages gently, memories buried deeply within his mind beginning to stir uncertainly. His voice shook faintly, hesitant and frightened, yet yearning. "Tell me more, please." Ruby exhaled slowly, knowing her journey was nearing its painful, hopeful conclusion. Let's start at the beginning. Ruby Santoro knelt gently beside the man who called himself Ian. The evening sunlight filtered softly through broken windows, illuminating the old classroom and the scattered drawings at Ian's feet. Ruby's heart thudded painfully, knowing the words she was about to speak would change his life forever. "Ian," Ruby said softly, her voice steady but kind, "I need you to trust me, even though this might be very hard." Ian's eyes searched hers warily, confusion clear on his gentle, weary face. He nodded hesitantly, silently urging her to continue. "Your real name is Caleb Parker." Ruby began gently, holding Caleb's childhood diary between them. "You were born in Carson Hollow, Nevada. You had a twin brother named Connor. Your parents were Ben and Jane Parker. Ian's brows furrowed painfully, distress clouding his expression. No, my name has always been Ian. I grew up here. His voice shook slightly, betraying hidden uncertainties. Ruby opened the diary slowly, revealing pages of childish handwriting and drawings. Familiar images Ian himself had sketched repeatedly over the years. Look carefully, Ruby urged softly. These drawings, you've done them your entire life, haven't you? Do you remember when you first drew them? Ian stared intensely at the diary, hands trembling slightly. Something deep within stirred uncomfortably, an unsettling, forgotten fragment slowly surfacing. I don't remember, Ian murmured painfully, eyes suddenly damp. But they've always been with me, haunting me somehow. Ruby gently placed her hand atop his. Because these were yours, Caleb. You drew these in a hidden place your Uncle Carl kept you trapped beneath a well in South Pines. Ian's breathing quickened sharply, memories flickering faintly, blurred yet vivid enough to cause pain. Carl, Ian whispered hoarsely, eyes wide in sudden fear. He always said he protected me from enemies, but I never understood who. Ruby's voice lowered soothingly. Carl was a deeply troubled man. The war broke something inside him. He took you and Connor, convinced the war was coming, but it was all in his mind. Ian shook his head slowly. Desperate confusion etched clearly. Connor, my brother? Ruby paused gently, her voice catching slightly. Connor didn't survive. You tried to protect each other, but Carl's anger... Connor tried to escape. Ian's shoulders shook softly, buried grief finally surfacing after decades hidden deeply beneath false memories. Tears filled his eyes, spilling quietly down his cheeks. I've always felt like someone was missing, always searching for someone I couldn't remember. Ruby placed her hand on his shoulder gently. Your mother Jane never stopped searching for you. She's waited 28 years to see you again. Ian closed his eyes tightly, emotions overwhelming him completely. Does she remember me? Ruby smiled gently, reassuringly. Every single day, Caleb. Flashbacks surged vividly, memories flooding Caleb's mind uncontrollably. Locked beneath the well, Carl pacing anxiously, muttering obsessively about hidden threats, forcing Caleb to repeat coded messages and false names until reality blurred. Over time, Carl methodically erased Caleb's identity, creating Ian, a boy whose past was deliberately obscured. Caleb remembered dark nights spent terrified, Carl whispering conspiracies, paranoia infecting his young mind until reality became fractured. Forget Caleb, Carl repeated endlessly. Ian is safe. Caleb is dangerous. Gradually, Caleb's true memories faded beneath layers of confusion and trauma. Carl meticulously reinforced Ian's new identity, constantly reminding him to remain hidden, afraid, obedient. With Caleb safe, Ruby relentlessly tracked Carl's whereabouts. Weeks of investigation finally located him, a solitary wanderer living under a false name, moving between shelters and alleys in distant cities, shadows of paranoia still haunting him relentlessly. Ruby confronted Carl in a narrow alley late one night, recognizing him immediately despite years of hardship etched upon his face. Carl stood rigidly, staring fiercely, still trapped mentally in an endless, imagined war. Carl Parker. Ruby spoke firmly, voice echoing off brick walls. It's over. Carl glared defiantly, eyes wild with paranoia. You don't understand. I saved them. I protected Caleb from a war nobody else saw coming. Ruby shook her head gently, but firmly. No, Carl, you destroyed a family. Caleb remembers everything. You took away his brother, his childhood, his entire life. Carl staggered backward, face contorted painfully, the truth finally piercing his tortured mind. I only wanted them safe, he whispered brokenly, tears spilling slowly down his worn face. Police officers stepped from shadows, carefully placing handcuffs on Carl's wrists. He offered no resistance, eyes vacant, finally defeated by the crushing weight of his own twisted truths. Ruby brought Caleb home to Carson Hollow, her heart heavy yet hopeful. Jane waited anxiously on the porch, trembling with anticipation. When Caleb emerged slowly from Ruby's car, Jane gasped softly, covering her mouth to suppress sobs. Caleb paused briefly, uncertainty flickering across his face, before Jane stepped forward, embracing him fiercely. "My boy," Jane whispered repeatedly, holding Caleb tightly, decades of grief finally releasing in joyful tears. Caleb hesitated briefly, then hugged his mother tightly, memories flooding back strongly now, his true identity returning piece by painful piece. Later, inside their old family home, Jane retrieved dozens of letters she'd written each year on Caleb's birthday, letters she'd never been able to send. Sitting beside Caleb, tears flowing gently, Jane read softly from each page, words filled with love, longing, and unwavering hope. Caleb listened quietly, feeling a profound connection forming again, anchoring him to a past finally reclaimed. Each word felt like healing, slowly repairing shattered fragments of his soul. Ruby watched quietly, heart swelling gently with the satisfaction of justice finally delivered. Days later, Caleb stood silently before Connor's symbolic grave, a small, simple stone inscribed lovingly by Jane years earlier. The Nevada sun bathed the quiet cemetery gently, birds singing softly among rustling leaves. Jane stood close beside him, holding Caleb's hand comfortingly. Ruby waited respectfully nearby, silently supportive. Caleb knelt quietly, placing fresh flowers gently upon Connor's grave, tears spilling silently down his cheeks. "I remember you now, Connor," Caleb whispered softly, voice trembling gently. "I'm sorry I couldn't save you." Jane touched his shoulder gently. "Connor will want you to live freely, Caleb. It's finally time for you to heal." Caleb nodded slowly, rising carefully to stand beside his mother, breathing deeply, feeling a lifetime of weight lifting gradually from his weary heart. Turning slowly toward Ruby, he offered a gentle, grateful smile. "Thank you for everything." Ruby smiled warmly, nodding gently. "You deserve peace, Caleb." Caleb took his mother's hand gently, feeling hope stir warmly, filling spaces inside him long, hollow, and cold. He glanced toward the horizon, sunlight promising new beginnings finally within reach. As they walked slowly away together, Caleb reflected quietly. Pain and loss intertwined delicately with newfound hope and love. Connor's memory will remain forever cherished, guiding Caleb toward healing and peace. Ruby lingered quietly near Connor's grave, satisfied deeply knowing she fulfilled her promise to Jane, to herself, and finally, to Danny, whose spirit she felt strongly beside her. Smiling softly, Ruby whispered gently, "Rest easy now." The gentle Nevada breeze answered quietly, carrying away decades of grief, finally replaced with peace and closure beneath endless blue skies.